is a little gem and jewel of a car.
When this car was built, you could have bought a row of cottages for the same price.
A pure piece of architecture on wheels.
She cost me 7 and sixpence. One of the best 7 and sixpences I've ever spent.
It's just like a kiddie's pedal car.
Lagonda is the name of a part of Springfield, Ohio, and Wilbur Gunn, our founder, came from there. And he came to England in 1891, and he was an engineer. He's also an amateur opera singer. And Wilbur Gunn set up as a consulting engineer over here, doing hydraulic machinery for lifts and safety curtains in theatres and that sort of thing. His sites for the hydraulic power, some of them were a long way from the railway, and he had to bicycle it, and he got fed up with doing that. So he made himself a motorbike, or put an engine onto the bike he had. And then friends saw it and said, "That's good, make me one." And he did, and friends of friends bought them. So he became a motorcycle manufacturer in his greenhouse. And the motorbikes went on till about 1904, with him riding them in all sorts of competitions. I think he was a bit hampered that he couldn't get a big enough engine into it. So he went for the tri-car, which was the next step, where you carried on driving the back wheel, but you had two wheels in the front steered with a seat for the passenger.
It's a Lagonda tri-car with a V-twin engine of 1,220 cc, automatic inlet valves, and it is, as far as anyone knows, the oldest Lagonda in existence. No older Lagonda has been found. The starting procedure on the Lagonda is it's relatively straightforward. You turn on the petrol and you flood the carburetor by not tickling it, because I think you damage the taper on the needle. If you do the traditional old tickling, you just lift it off the seat until it floods, release it. You, very, very importantly, you retard the ignition completely. If you leave it advanced, you are likely to find yourself up in the roof. She kicks like mad if she's advanced, but if you fully retard her, she's quite safe. You then prime fuel into the engine by turning it over anything from 4 to 6 or even 8 times. It's very cold. And then you switch her on, give her one sharp pull up, and off she goes. And then we have this forecarriage, which looks a little like a bath chair, where your passenger rides, provided two things. One is they're not too heavy, and the second is they've got lots of courage. When my wife is sitting in the front, she is, of course, the nearest thing to the accident. And I think it must be pretty terrifying. She's very noble and she doesn't show it, although there was one occasion on the London Brighton when a traffic bollard approached us very rapidly. It only just swerved in time to get past. Well, when you think that it's got 1,220 cc engine, with a compression ratio of 6 to 1, which was phenomenal for those days and for automatic induction valves, you realize it does go. It doesn't stop as well, I might say. You've got external contracting brakes as opposed to the modern system of external expanding. Front wheel brakes, you really have got to sort of offer up a wish before you apply them, because you don't know whether you'll pull to the left or the right. I first saw the Lagonda when I went up to Birmingham University in, I think it must have been 1935. And in the bicycle shed was this rusty wreck. And we made inquiries, and the janitor, to whom we gave £half a crown tip, which was quite a fortune to us, those days, to find out who it belonged to. Came back and said it belonged to the Carnival Committee, and they had finished with it and they had given it to him. So we gave him the rest of our fortune, which was another 5 shillings. So you can say she cost me 7 and 6pence. I consider one of the best 7 and 6pences I've ever spent. After the war, my twin brother and I, who had shared this car, as we shared most things in life, got married, and it became obvious that we got to split up all our joint possessions. The most precious of all was, of course, the Lagonda, and on the toss of a coin, I won. This London-Brighton, this last November, was the 60th anniversary of the first one I ever did. So to me this one was particularly important, and she realised it, and she never missed a beat. She did it beautifully.
Well, we kept on making tricars, making them bigger and more powerful, and then suddenly the market just collapsed. The thing to do was to progress to cars. In the next few years, that's 1908, 9, 10, the cars got bigger and bigger every year.
They were aiming at the market of the aristocracy, making large, powerful cars. But in 1912, 1913, the company did a complete metamorphosis. I don't know what their thinking was, but they abandoned the large cars and their foreign markets and started building a tiny little light car, this one, for home consumption. This is a 1913 11.1 horsepower Lagonda, a little light economy car built before the First World War. It was a car for the new motorists, the vicars, the doctors, the people who thought they could get rid of the pony and trap. And it was very cheap. It was £120 odd. When I first found this car, it was hidden away in a barn owned by a very fiery English major who would see visitors off with a shotgun. I broke in fact, to find details of the car, and afterwards, when researching it, I found that it was the oldest known four-wheeled Lagonda. In fact, it wasn't known. It wasn't in any of the record books, but the number's there on the car, and I realised what a find it was. And I had to be patient. I had to wait many years before the car was available on the market. I had contacts through local people and was in the end able to purchase it, which was a great joy. It was almost entirely original, and I've tried to keep it that way. I haven't knocked the dents out of the headlamps or the dents out of the radiator. I've not repainted it. I've tried to keep it as it is, with some sort of patina of age, whilst looking after it properly. When Lagonda built this car, it was revolutionary. The monocoque construction was revolutionary, and they had funny ideas. They made a car which was quite streamlined. They hid the horn underneath the car. Most veteran cars, you see the big brass horn. In this car it's hidden, but it works. There's a single brake shoe made of cast iron in each of the brake drums. It's metal to metal, and it has to be lubricated with the oil that drips through from the differential. It hasn't got geared steering, so it is a quarter of a turn from lock to lock if you can actually get it to do it, because it's it's just like a kiddie's pedal car, the way the steering works. But with the tiny little motorcycle tyres the car's fitted with, it really does take about 120 to 150 foot to stop from 30 miles an hour. On a level road, Now, if you get down a steep hill, well, sometimes you can't even stop at all, but that's life for a veteran motorist. I think it was through my car that I actually managed to marry my wife. We met in a boarding house, and she told me she'd got a Lotus, and I told her I'd got a Lagonda. Now, I imagined her Lotus was a fast, up-to-date sports car, and it was a beaten-up old thing, but a genuine Lotus. And she thought I was a semi-millionaire with a 4.5 litre 1930s racing Lagonda. So we both deceived one another a little, but the marriage has worked out splendidly, and I have the car to thank for it.
During the war, he made munitions entirely. That once the war was over, they had to try and get back into production as soon as they possibly could. The problem they were facing was that the Austin 7 and the Morris 8 and cars like that were coming along. There was no way that Lagonda could compete with them. They were not far too small. So the only thing to do was go up market, which they did.
This is a 2 litre Lagonda. The model was made from approximately 1928 to 1930. It's a 4-seater open tourer. You do have a hood and full weather equipment. You don't really need the weather equipment if you're going fast enough when it's raining. When this car was built, you could have bought possibly a row of cottages for the same price. I know that in the mid-30s, the price of the blown 2 litre would have bought 2 houses where I first lived. It appealed, I think, to the sporting gentry. The first time I saw one of these was in the mid-30s. My father told me that the Lagonda, in his estimation at that time, was one of the finest cars being made. And they were only made at Staines. And he said, next time we go to Staines on the bus, we'll walk over the bridge and you'll see where their factory is if you're that interested. My hobby, I knew, was going to be old cars when I could afford it. And I waited till I saw the Lagonda, which I liked. And it's just carried on from there. A friend of mine phoned me and said, if you want some 2 litre spares, Alec, there's been a nasty barn fire and the barn had collapsed on top of the car. When I first saw the car, and the old gentleman who had owned it for many years, he was very, very distressed. The body had disappeared, the chassis had been twisted, every aluminium casting had melted. I eventually loaded it on a trailer, took it home and proceeded to take it to pieces bit by bit and thought, well, I don't know, there is a chance with this. Over a period of 4 years, I rebuilt the car. I used to come home from work, have my dinner rather quickly and straight out into the garage. Sometimes I'd finish at 10 or 11, another time it'd be 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. No way did I walk away from the car and think, I'll put that split pin in tomorrow. It was always finished. The headlamps nod, they'll say good morning if you want them to say good morning to you. There are 2 clusters of grease nipples, one on either side of the car, and from those there are copper pipes running to each of the moving parts on your steering and springs, etc. When I drive along with this, it does give you a feeling of elation, and also the fact that I know that this is the car which I built, albeit from bits supplied by Lagondas many years ago. I've put every single thing back on this car which was possible to take to pieces, restored or rebuilt to as good as new.
2 litre was Lagonda's biggest success. And then at the beginning of 35, the 30 mile an hour limit came in and driving tests and all sorts of new rules, and the sports car market just evaporated again. And Lagonda's market went with it. No, it was a total overreaction. It would have come back, but by then the bank had had enough and pulled the plug out, and they went into receivership. But they had made the previous autumn 3 short M45s for racing, which had done exceptionally well in the Ulster TT, entered them for Le Mans and actually won it while they were in receivership. The receiver had now got a completely different animal. He got a Le Mans winning company to sell. And he went back to the bidders and said, you must pay me more than that. And only one of them agreed. And that was Alan Good, who was a sort of company doctor of the period. And he'd signed up W.O. Bentley as a designer, because W.O. was working as fast as he could on his masterpiece, which was going to be the V12.
This car is a Lagonda-bodied V12 drop-head coupe, they were called in those days, a 4.5 litre engine. This car actually was sold in May 1938. It's unusual in that it has a short-stroke engine. Nearly all the engines made in this country at that time were long-stroke because of the tax system. The tax was based on the bore of the cylinders, and as this car is short-stroke, it has a big bore, and the tax on it was, I think, £48 a year, which was approximately equal to the wages of a living-in domestic servant at the time. Puts it into context. It's much more like a modern car. The engine has a sort of turbine smoothness when it's going around fast. It's a fast car, but above about 80 it takes time to wind it up. It'll still do its 100. I once had it going at 115, and it was very steady at that speed. This was the fastest production car made in the UK when it was produced. If you drive it fast, it comes down to about 11 miles per gallon, and if you drive it slowly, you might get 12.5. So there's not any incentive to drive it slowly. I always make it keep going. I think they were probably bought by companies for their chairman and chief executives to go around. And this car, in fact, was the company car for the managing director of Horlicks in 1938. I think it's got a lot of very appealing features, the beautiful sweeping lines. Some of the detail work is quite exceptional. This panel here has got inset silver in it. The door handles, or a lot of the fittings, are quite special and mostly very attractive. I'll show you the Art Deco cigar lighter, made of pre-war plastic. I think it did Lagonda a power of good. I think that it transformed it from being regarded as a manufacturer of a slightly tired six-cylinder sports car design into being a really up-to-date, very special car.
Car production had to stop in September 1939 when the war broke out. Lagonda specialised in flamethrowers. The most successful was probably the Crocodile, which was a tank of jelly petrol towed behind a tank. W.O. Bentley hadn't had a lot to do during the war insofar as what they were making, because they were being designed by other people. And he was secretly designing the 2.6, his post-war car, so that they had a prototype on the road practically on VJ Day. But they couldn't get a steel allowance. It's a very complicated story, but they couldn't get a steel allowance to build it, so they had plenty of money, but not able to make cars. And Alan Good resigned, and the new owners put the company up for sale. And David Brown, who'd got Aston Martins by then, but wasn't too happy with their engine, bought the company really to get hold of this engine design and put the car into production. Now, unfortunately, he fell out with W.O. Bentley almost at once, and W.O. left to set up his own consultancy. The next Lagonda model was in 1961, the Rapide, but the next Lagonda of any note came out in 1976, and this was a complete eye-opener, the William Townes car, quite unlike any other car on the market before or since.
When the car came out, it took the motoring world by storm, totally futuristic, and never had anything been seen like it before. It is very much a razor edge design, very sharp. The edges later were softened, I personally think, to the detriment of the car, because this is how the car was designed in its purest form, as a pure piece of architecture on wheels. The electronics of the time were totally futuristic, damn comic stuff. You needed a 2-day course to fly the car before you could actually drive it.
Oil overheating.
The car is internally trimmed with best Conley hide in true tradition of Lagonda and Aston Martin. It is a direct competitor, no doubt, to the Bentley and Rolls-Royce and other marques such as that. But we have with this car Ferrari performance and Rolls-Royce comfort, grace with pace. I initially came by this particular car after suffering withdrawal symptoms from having a previous Lagonda for 8 years, and within 6 weeks I couldn't live without one. So I made contact with a colleague of mine in London who found this particular car, which was the subject of a receivership, and therefore I managed to acquire the car at receivership price.
They were good cars, but that market dried up in 1990, and since then there hasn't been a Lagonda except the Vignale, which was really an eye-catcher for the Geneva show a couple of years back, which wasn't seriously meant to be a production car. Well, we hear that there might be another Lagonda, and we hope there will be. Certainly people at the factory at Aston Martin Lagonda at Newport Pagnell seem keen to do a Lagonda. They feel there's a market for the chap who's had all the Bentleys and would like something different. And certainly in the small production they would have in mind, it would be different. But quite what form it would take, we haven't the faintest idea. But we hope so.
The marque, hopefully, is far from dead. Lagonda, along with Aston Martin, will go hopefully now from strength to strength, with people still prepared to pay fairly astronomical sums of money for this type of car and this type of motoring.